Kyle Zhao stood in the middle of the Riverview District's annual investment forum, his arm draped possessively over his new girlfriend, and announced to a room full of 200 industry heavyweights that I was a washed-up housewife who couldn't survive without him. He had no idea that 3 days earlier, I had bought the building he was standing in. The spotlight slammed into my face, harsh and blinding. It was one of those professional-grade LED arrays that turned every pore into a crater and every flaw into a headline. The ballroom was packed, real estate developers in bespoke suits, construction supply moguls with gold watches winking under the lights, venture capitalists who could write seven-figure checks without blinking, the kind of people whose names appeared in the business section every other week. Crystal chandeliers dripped from the ceiling like frozen waterfalls. The air was thick with expensive perfume, the low hum of power-brokering conversations, and the quiet clink of champagne flutes meeting in the half-dark. I had just stepped out from backstage. My heels made no sound on the plush carpet, but I felt every step reverberate through my chest. The MC had just finished introducing me as the owner of Crestview Tower, and the audience's reaction was still a confused ripple. Some people clapping reflexively, others leaning to their neighbors, asking if they'd heard the name correctly. I hadn't even picked up the microphone yet when a hand shot out in front of me, the fingertip practically jabbing into the bridge of my nose. "Milajo, who the hell do you think you're fooling?" Kyle's voice cut through the ambient murmur of the crowd, his spit spraying across my cheek. A single droplet landed just below my left eye, cold and then warm. "You've been gone from me for 6 months. How much money could you possibly have made? How could you be the owner of this building? What kind of sugar daddy did you latch onto that you think you can stand here and lie to everyone?" The word sugar daddy landed like a grenade in the middle of the room. The whispering stopped. Every head turned. You could have heard a champagne bubble pop. Monica Lee was draped over his arm in a custom haute couture dress, the Cartier bracelet on her wrist catching the lights and throwing them back in sharp, fractured sparks. Her dress was a deep emerald silk that pulled around her ankles, the kind of gown that cost more than most people's monthly mortgage. Her eyes swept over me from head to toe with the clinical, unhurried gaze of a woman appraising a clearance rack item she wouldn't be caught dead wearing. The corner of her mouth curled into the faintest trace of a smile, private, satisfied, cruel. She tilted her head slightly, and I caught the glint of the diamond studs in her ears. The same ones Kyle had charged at the Bellagio months ago. She was wearing his betrayal on her body like a trophy. The stares of the crowd pressed in on me like needles. Over 200 people, the heavy hitters of the construction supply industry and the real estate world, every last one of them someone who mattered in this city. People leaned toward each other, whispering behind cupped hands. Others took half a step closer, wine glasses in hand, their body language shifting from passive attendance to active spectatorship. Rubbernecking was simply human nature, especially in a room full of people who traded in status and appearances. I recognized most of these faces. A few of them used to supply Kyle with materials, back when we were still married. The way they looked at me now was layered. Curiosity, skepticism, and a certain barely concealed anticipation. They were waiting to watch a good show. They were waiting to see which way the wind would blow. In the back of the room, I spotted old Roger from the decorating business, the one who'd set up Kyle's meeting with Fiona. His mouth was hanging open. I stared at Kyle's face, at that mask of arrogance and contempt plastered across his features. He was wearing the custom gray suit I'd picked out for him 2 years ago, the one from the Italian tailor in the financial district. $3,000. I'd saved for 3 months to buy it. He was sweating through the fabric now, dark patches blooming under his arms. His face was red, from the whiskey he'd been drinking at the open bar, from the adrenaline of public humiliation, from the sheer inability to process what his eyes were seeing. My fingertips brushed against the property deed tucked inside my bag, the one that had arrived just 3 days ago, its dark green cover still crisp and stiff with that new paper rigidity. The notary stamp was slightly raised under my touch. I could feel the embossed seal, the slight texture of the county recorder's ink. This piece of paper represented $18 million, 6 months of 16-hour workdays, and the complete and total demolition of the man standing in front of me. I let the corner of my mouth lift. Slowly. Very, very slowly. He forgot, when he stood there calling me a washed-up housewife, that before I married him, I was a national sales champion. 3 years running. The best closer this city had ever seen. I once closed a $12 million deal on a handshake in a parking lot while running 103-degree fever. I once sold a commercial building to a man who'd sworn he would never set foot in this city again. I could read a room, read a face, read the exact moment when someone's resistance crumbled and their checkbook opened. And right now, standing on this stage with 200 people watching, I could read Kyle Zhao like a neon sign. He was terrified. 6 months earlier, June 18th, 2023, my 6th wedding anniversary with Kyle Zhao. It had rained all day in Lakewood. Not the gentle, poetic drizzle the Pacific Northwest was famous for, but a relentless, soaking downpour that turned the streets into rivers and filled the air with the smell of wet asphalt and damp earth. The kind of rain that made umbrellas useless, that found its way under collars and into shoes, that drummed against windows with the insistence of a debt collector. The muggy heat of early summer had been soaked through by the rain until the whole world felt sticky and suffocating. The sky outside the kitchen window was a flat, uniform gray, the color of old dishwater. There was no horizon, just a seamless blur where the clouds merged with the rooftops. I was in the kitchen, simmering his favorite dish, pork rib and lotus root soup, the recipe his mother had taught me in the early days of our marriage, when she still called me her daughter and said I was the best thing that had ever happened to her son. She'd shown me how to select the lotus roots. They had to be the thick ones, the ones with 9 holes, not 7. 9-hole roots cooked down soft and velvety. 7-hole roots stayed fibrous no matter how long you boiled them. I had gone to the farmer's market at dawn, 6 in the morning, the sky barely light, to pick out the lotus roots myself from an old Vietnamese woman who sold them out of a cooler in the back of her minivan. I blanched the ribs 3 times, skimming the gray foam off the surface of the boiling water each time, until the broth ran clear and pure. The soup had been simmering for over 2 hours, the lid of the Dutch oven rattling gently under the pressure of the steam, a soft, rhythmic gurgle filling the kitchen with the deep, savory aroma of slow-cooked comfort. The whole apartment smelled like home, like ginger and pork and the faint sweetness of red dates. I had set the table with our wedding china, the good plates we only used once a year, 2 candles and glass holders, a bottle of Riesling chilling in the fridge. I turned off the stove and wiped the sweat from my forehead with the back of my hand. My blouse was sticking to my back. I had put on makeup that morning, for the first time in weeks, a little foundation, mascara, the lipstick he'd once said he liked. I had just picked up my phone to ask him what time he'd be home when I heard the lock turn. My heart did that stupid little flutter it still did after 6 years, and I smoothed my hair and walked toward the door with a smile on my face. Kyle walked in carrying a cloud of unfamiliar women's perfume, sweet and cloying, with a chemical fruitiness that clung to the back of the throat, mingling with the sour whiskey on his breath. It hit me like a physical force before I even saw his face. Behind him was a woman in a thin slip dress, sequins pasted across her collarbones, her feet strapped into a pair of 5-inch stilettos that made crisp, sharp clicking sounds against the hardwood floor I had waxed just last week. I had been on my hands and knees for 2 hours waxing that floor. My knees were still sore. Monica Lee, Kyle's sales director. She had been with him for 2 years. Everyone in the company knew. His drivers knew. They'd driven her to his hotel rooms a dozen times. His warehouse managers knew. They'd seen her climb into his car after hours, seen her adjust her lipstick in the passenger side visor mirror. The receptionist who had once slipped me a sympathetic look across the lobby knew. She'd watched Monica walk into Kyle's office and close the door, and the door would stay closed for an hour, sometimes 2. I was the only one who supposedly didn't. The faithful, trusting wife at home, stirring soup and folding laundry and believing every lie he told her. Kyle didn't change his shoes. His leather soles, still wet from the rain and flecked with bits of dirt and tiny crushed leaves, tracked straight across the living room. The wet footprints stained the floor I'd waxed, leaving dark smears on the pale oak. He slapped a stack of papers onto the dining table. The force sent a tremor through the wood. The steam from the pork rib soup shuddered under the impact, momentarily blurring the dense columns of fine print. A drop of broth sloshed over the rim of the pot and landed on the tablecloth. I watched it spread, a tiny amber stain on white linen. "Sign it." His voice had the dismissive tone you'd use to wave off a telemarketer. He didn't look at me. He was already looking past me, at something on his phone. I picked up the document. Divorce settlement agreement. The paper was thick, expensive. He'd had a lawyer draft it. Article 6 was printed in heavy, unforgiving font. Both parties acknowledged that no joint marital property exists. The condo was my premarital purchase. The company was built by me alone. The revenue, the cars, the cash in the accounts, all of it belongs to the company. You can't touch a single cent. For 6 years, you've eaten my food and spent my money. You haven't earned a dime. You should be grateful I'm not asking you to pay me back. I read it twice. The words didn't blur. My eyes were perfectly dry. He lit a cigarette. He never smoked inside. He knew I hated the smell. I had asthma as a child, and smoke still made my chest tight, and leaned back in the dining chair. He put his feet up on the table, right next to the soup pot. His shoes left a smudge of mud on the white tablecloth. Sign the papers, and I'll give you $1,500 as a parting gift. Don't sign, and I'll just drag this out. Take it to court, and you won't even get the $1,500. That was what 6 years of marriage was worth. Less than the handbag Monica was carrying. Less than one night in the Bellagio. Less than the Cartier earrings sparkling in her lobes. Monica had already made herself comfortable on my sofa. She kicked off her heels and tucked her feet up under her, like she'd been living there for years. She pulled a YSL lipstick out of her limited edition Louis Vuitton bag. The bag alone was $4,000. I'd looked it up once, idly, in a moment of boredom, and flipped open a compact mirror to touch up her makeup. She pressed her lips together after applying the bottom coat, the crushed diamonds on her fingernails glittering under the lights. She snapped the mirror shut and said, in a voice dripping with counterfeit sincerity, "Mila, just sign it. You're 32. You've been out of the workforce for 6 years. Right now you couldn't even land a $400 a month admin job. Kyle's being more than generous, giving you $1,500. That'll keep you going for a good long while. Don't cling. It looks bad on everyone." As she said this, a smear of coral lipstick was still stuck to her front tooth. I stared at it. That smear of lipstick seemed to sum up everything. The carelessness, the arrogance, the absolute certainty that she had already won. I looked at her. 26 years old. Good skin. Narrow waist. High cheekbones that looked like they'd been enhanced with filler. She probably thought she had won. Beaten a 32-year-old housewife who couldn't even land a minimum wage job. It was an easy victory. So easy she took it for granted. She didn't know that I had closed more deals in a single quarter than she would close in her entire career. She didn't know that the contacts in my old client book were worth more than everything Kyle owned. She didn't know that in 3 months, she would be running away to Barcelona, and in 6 months, she would be nothing but a footnote in a story I was just beginning to write. I pulled my gaze away and turned back to Kyle. 6 years ago, when he proposed to me in that rented studio apartment, the one with the broken air conditioner and the neighbor who practiced opera at 3 in the morning, we used to split the electric bill right down the middle, 50-50, even if it was just a few bucks. He had just quit his job to start his own company. He had $3,000 to his name, and 2 of that was borrowed from his uncle. The apartment baked like a steam room all summer. We slept with ice packs wrapped in towels. I lived through that whole brutal season with him and never uttered a single word of complaint. He got down on one knee on the peeling linoleum floor and slid a soda can tab onto my finger, promising he'd buy me a real diamond ring when he made it big. His eyes were red-rimmed when he said it. The tab was too loose and kept slipping off my ring finger. He swore he would never, ever do me wrong. I believed him. I was 26 years old, and I believed him with my whole heart. Later, when I gave him $180,000 to start his business, my entire savings, every bonus I'd ever earned, every commission I'd fought for in conference rooms and construction sites and coffee shops across 3 states, he held me and sobbed into my shoulder for half the night. His tears soaked through my shirt. He said, "Wife, you're my savior. If I ever do you wrong in this life, may I die a miserable death." I stroked his hair and told him I believed in him. And I did. I believed in him more than I believed in myself. I didn't fight with him. I didn't make a scene. I didn't throw the soup in his face or scream or cry or beg. I picked up the pen and signed the divorce papers, stroke by stroke, my handwriting neat and steady. When I wrote Mila Jo, my hand didn't tremble at all. The pen made a soft scratching sound against the paper. Kyle blinked, clearly thrown that I hadn't put up a struggle. He'd probably rehearsed this moment, prepared counterarguments for my tears, my pleading. The surprise passed quickly, replaced by that familiar mask of contempt. He probably figured I'd be lost without him, that I'd be back on my knees begging before the year was out. He leaned against the doorframe, cigarette dangling from his lips, and shouted after me, "When you're out on the street begging for scraps, don't come knocking on my door. I'd be embarrassed to know you." I walked out carrying the suitcase I had packed long before. I'd packed it 3 weeks earlier, on a Tuesday afternoon when he was supposedly at a client meeting but was actually, according to the bank alert I'd received, at a 4-star hotel across town. I had packed it calmly, methodically, the way you pack for a trip you've been planning for a long time. It was heavy, not because it held any clothes, but because it was stuffed with my old Salesperson of the Year trophies, their gold plating dulled by years in a storage box, but still solid and real. My client contact cards, 300 of them, bundled with rubber bands that had started to crack with age. The loan agreement Kyle had signed with his own hand 6 years ago, folded carefully in a plastic sleeve. And the black thumb drive containing everything I'd collected over the past 3 months. Every bank statement, every hotel receipt, every piece of evidence that would eventually bring him to his knees. Going down the stairs, the elevator was taking too long, and I couldn't bear to stand in that hallway another second. I glanced back at that door one last time. Apartment 1608, the home I had lived in for 6 years. The place where I'd hung curtains and arranged furniture and scrubbed bathrooms and waited up for a man who was out spending my money on another woman. The soup was still sitting on the stove. It was probably cold by then. The candles on the table were still burning. The elevator arrived, and I stepped in with my suitcase. The moment the doors slid shut with a soft pneumatic hiss, those 6 years of my life were sealed off behind me, as cold and congealed as that pot of forgotten soup. I leaned against the elevator wall, cold brass, polished to a mirror finish, and called Fiona Yao. She picked up on the second ring. "I'm divorced." I walked away with nothing. "Come get me." Fiona swore explosively on the other end, a string of profanity so creative it almost made me smile. She said she'd be there in 10 minutes. She made it in 8. I stood outside the apartment complex under a sycamore tree. The rain had stopped, leaving the world freshly washed. The sky was clearing in the west, a thin strip of orange and pink bleeding through the gray. The storm had knocked a layer of leaves onto the ground, soft and wet under my feet. I looked up at the window of the apartment I used to call home, 16th floor, 3rd from the left. The living room light was still on. Behind the curtains, 2 blurry silhouettes moved. Celebrating, probably. Opening a bottle of my wine. Toasting to their freedom. A gust of wind shook the tree, and cold rainwater dripped from the leaves onto my shoulder, a cold shock against my skin. And then, suddenly, I felt something in my chest unclench. That knot I'd been carrying for half a year. The knot of suspicion and dread and gut-wrenching, bone-deep sadness. It was gone. Just like that. Unraveled and dissolved. Like a blood clot breaking up and washing away. The truth was, I had caught Kyle cheating 3 months earlier. His business trips had been getting more frequent, his returns home later and later. He used to call me every night when he traveled, even if it was just for 2 minutes. That stopped. He'd put a passcode on his phone. He'd never bothered with a passcode before. I'd picked up his phone once, just to check the weather, and the lock screen stared back at me like a stranger's face. In March, he'd taken a business trip to Vegas, said he was closing a major client. The day after he left, I got a bank alert. He'd charged over $10,000 to his card. A luxury suite at the Bellagio, the hotel's in-house jewelry boutique. A pair of Cartier diamond studs. In 6 years of marriage, he'd never bought me a single piece of jewelry worth more than $300. The most expensive birthday gift he ever gave me was a Coach canvas tote. On sale, about $120, and he'd grumbled for a month about how expensive it was. I'd thanked him and used it until the straps frayed. I didn't call to confront him. I didn't cry into the phone or text him angry messages. I opened my laptop, sat down at the kitchen table, and pulled up every bank statement from the past 6 months. I was the one who'd set up his account passwords, back when he was too busy to deal with administrative stuff, and he'd never bothered to change them. The Vegas hotel, the flights to Miami, the charges at luxury boutiques, Chanel, Hermes, Louis Vuitton. Every transaction was laid out in black and white. Then I went through his company accounts. The business used cloud-based financial software, and he'd apparently forgotten that I was the one who'd registered that cloud account for him. I'd set it up on a Sunday afternoon, sitting next to him on the couch while he watched football. Over 3 months, he'd taken 2 business inspections to Miami and 1 to Cancun. Every flight booking was for 2 people. Every hotel reservation was for a king bed. The Miami hotel order had a note attached: honeymoon package, rose petal arrangement. Champagne on arrival. Champagne on arrival. I remembered the one time he'd bought me champagne. It was at our wedding, and it was the cheapest bottle on the menu. I sat alone in front of the computer, staring at those charges, the living room lights still off. The glow of the screen lit my face in cold blue tones. I thought I would cry, but I didn't. I just felt cold, the kind of cold that seeps out from your bones, that no blanket or hot drink can touch. 6 years ago, I'd sat with him in a sweltering rental with a broken air conditioner and said, "It's okay. We'll get through this together." 6 years later, he was living it up at the Bellagio, spending my money, booking honeymoon packages with another woman. The $180,000 I'd given him, my entire savings, every bonus I'd ever earned, was paying for rose petals and champagne and diamond earrings for a 26-year-old sales director who probably couldn't close a deal to save her life. He probably thought I was stupid. He forgot that before I married him, I was the national property sales champion 3 years running. My greatest skill was seeing straight through people, knowing exactly what they wanted and what they thought they could get away with. If he thought he could pull one over on me, he was nowhere near qualified. I didn't say a word. I saved every piece of evidence: bank screenshots, hotel bookings, flight records, jewelry purchases, filed in neat folders on an encrypted thumb drive. And then I kept right on cooking his meals, washing his clothes, keeping his house. Occasionally the shirts he wore home had lipstick stains on the collar. Coral. Always coral. I pretended not to see them. I took them to the bathroom and hand-washed them in cold water, rubbing the fabric against itself until the pink faded to a ghost of a stain. He probably thought he had such a gullible wife. I thought my gullible husband was even easier to fool. When Fiona pulled up in her Mercedes, a sleek silver S-Class she'd bought with her own money, with her own name on the title, and saw the suitcase in my hand, her face went white with fury. She jumped out of the car, her heels splashing straight into a puddle. She didn't even notice. "Mellow, have you lost your mind?" She grabbed my suitcase, her grip so fierce her knuckles went pale. "Kyle cheated on you. You could have taken him to court. You could have left him with nothing. Why the hell would you sign away everything yourself? Did he completely brainwash you?" I opened the suitcase and showed her. There were no clothes inside. Gold-plated Salesperson of the Year trophies, National Annual Performance Champion, West Coast Regional Sales Elite, National Customer Satisfaction Leader, every one of them polished to a high shine. Stacks of yellowed client business cards, bundled with rubber bands, 300 names and phone numbers and email addresses, 300 people who had once trusted me with the biggest financial decisions of their lives. A black thumb drive containing 6 years of Kyle's bank statements, hotel records, flight receipts, and every scrap of evidence documenting his concealment of marital assets and his tax evasion. And on top of it all, a loan agreement from 6 years ago, the paper already yellowing at the edges but the handwriting and the red thumbprint still starkly clear. Party A, Mellow. Party B, Kyle Zhao. Loan amount, $180,000. Annual interest rate, 10%. Loan term, 6 years. Total due upon maturity, principal plus interest, $320,000. Below that was his signature, slightly smeared. And his thumbprint, the ridges still visible in the dried red ink. Fiona pulled out that loan agreement and read it from top to bottom. Her lips moved silently. Then her eyes lit up like someone had struck a match behind them. "You've been setting this up the whole time?" I folded the agreement and put it back in the suitcase, tucking it carefully into the plastic sleeve. "He thinks I can't survive without him," I said. "So I'm going to show him exactly how well I can live. Better than him, 1,000 times better. The things he cares about most are his reputation, his money, and his pathetic little company. Fine. I'm going to smash them, one by one." That night, I stayed at Fiona's place. She lived in a high-rise apartment overlooking Lake Washington, floor-to-ceiling windows with a view of the water and the city skyline beyond. It was the kind of apartment you saw in magazines, with polished concrete floors and track lighting and a wine fridge built into the kitchen island. She cooked spicy crawfish for me, a massive pot of them, bright red and swimming in chili oil and Sichuan peppercorns, and pulled 6 cans of beer out of the fridge. We sat on her balcony drinking, the summer night breeze carrying the clean, faintly sweet scent of the lake. Across the water, the Riverview district glittered, its office towers rising like glowing monoliths, their windows lit up in a patchwork of yellow and white. In the distance, the tallest tower was still under construction, the light on its crane blinking steadily on and off, a red pulse against the dark sky, like a heartbeat. Fiona asked me what I planned to do. We were the same age. We'd entered the industry the same year and made Salesperson of the Year the same year. I quit. She didn't. She had climbed all the way to General Manager of Homeworld Realty. Of everyone I knew, she was the least skilled at offering comfort. She'd told me once that emotions made her uncomfortable, that she'd rather negotiate a hostile contract than sit through a tearful conversation. But she was the first person I called the night I got divorced. First, pick up my old work, I said, taking a sip of beer. The cold liquid felt good, grounding. Reconnect with my old client base. I've got contacts I haven't spoken to in 6 years. Time to start visiting. I paused, looking at the tallest tower across the water, its crane light blinking steadily, and the corner of my mouth slowly curved upward. Kyle's company is in construction supplies, right? Isn't he looking for new office space? Fiona froze for a second, a crawfish halfway to her mouth, then burst out laughing, slapping her thigh so hard the beer cans on the table rattled. You are so savage. I love it. He had someone reach out to me just last month. Said his old office lease is almost up and he wants to upgrade to something bigger, preferably a brand new tower in the Riverview District core. Wants to look the part. Guess which building he wants more than anything. I followed the line of her finger. Across the lake, a glass curtain wall tower that hadn't even finished construction yet stood out against the night sky, its roofline traced by a sleek ribbon of LED lights. Crestview Tower. The most anticipated commercial office project in the Riverview District that year. Prime location, direct transit access, top-tier amenities. Even before it had officially launched, dozens of companies were already on the waiting list. That's the one, Fiona said. He's been bragging to everyone that the moment Crestview opens, he's going to lock down the best floors. He's even been telling people the owner is a friend of his, that they're holding the space for him. She snorted, a very unladylike sound that made her sound like a disgruntled horse. He doesn't even know who the owner is. The owner hasn't even been publicly identified yet. I leaned back in my chair and finished the last of my beer. Good, I said. Let's prepare a welcome gift for him. My first deal back in the game came from my old client Vincent Wong, a real estate developer who had been scrapping in the industry for decades. He'd started out as a construction worker in the 80s, framing houses with his bare hands, and had built an empire one brick at a time. 6 years ago, I'd helped him sell a development that had been bleeding out, bad location, lousy amenities, only a dozen units moved in 6 months. The previous agent had told him it was hopeless, that he should just cut his losses. I took over, reoriented the market positioning, changed the entire promotion strategy, and led a team of over 30 agents. In 3 months, we sold $22 million. He clapped me on the shoulder at the celebration dinner and said, "Mila, I owe you one." His hand was calloused and heavy, and his eyes were a little wet. Later, when I quit to get married, he only ever reached out on holidays, a text at Chinese New Year, a card at Christmas. When I called him from Fiona's apartment the morning after my divorce, my voice still hoarse from the beer and the late night, he paused for a long moment. I could hear the faint sound of wind on his end of the line. He was probably on his balcony, smoking one of those thin cigars he favored, looking out over the city he'd helped build. Kyle. I never liked that guy. Vincent's voice was heavy, the voice of a man who had seen too much to be surprised by human weakness, but was still disappointed. Back when you insisted on marrying him, I didn't feel it was my place to say anything. But I'm glad you're out now. He wasn't good enough for you. He was never good enough for you. He paused. I heard him exhale smoke. You want to get back in the game? Fine. I've got something on my desk right now. A client out of San Francisco wants to buy an entire commercial building for a hotel. Budget of $11 million. He's gone through several agents already. Couldn't find the right fit. He's a tough one. Very particular. Very demanding. See what you can do. The deal itself was no layup. The buyer was Leo Lin, a manufacturing guy who'd built his fortune from scratch in the industrial outskirts of the Bay Area and was notoriously exacting. He'd chewed up and spat out every agent who'd come before me. One of them, a 20-year veteran, had walked out of a meeting with Leo and told Fiona he'd rather quit the industry than spend another minute in that man's presence. I didn't hesitate. In 3 days, I visited 12 properties. My legs swelled. I wore through 2 blisters on the soles of my feet. I'd been out of the game for 6 years, and my feet had forgotten what it felt like to walk 10 miles a day in heels. I bandaged them in a gas station bathroom and kept going. 6 years out of the industry. The market had shifted, new developments had sprung up in neighborhoods that used to be empty lots. Property values had shifted like tectonic plates, but my fundamentals were still there. Judging a location, calculating returns, verifying title, those core skills didn't depend on what era you were in. They were baked into my bones. In the end, I found Leo a standalone building on the edge of the Riverview district. 12 floors, around 90,000 square feet. The owner was an old developer wanting to cash out and emigrate to New Zealand to be near his daughter. He'd priced it nearly $200,000 under market, but required a full cash purchase. Leo walked through the building twice, less than 20 minutes total. He didn't say a word during the first walkthrough. He just walked, his hands clasped behind his back, his eyes moving over every corner, every ceiling tile, every window frame. He stood by the top-floor window, looking out at the lake view. The water was sparkling in the afternoon sun, dotted with white sailboats, and suddenly turned and asked, "Ms. Zhou, do you think this building is worth it?" "Yes," I said. I didn't hesitate. Not because it's on the lake. Because the title is clean, the price is below market, and the surrounding amenities are mature. There's a light rail station half a block away, 3 new restaurants opening next quarter, and a tech campus being built 2 blocks east. This building will let you recoup your investment in 5 years and start turning a profit by year 7. I've run the numbers 3 times. I can show you the projections. He looked at me for several seconds. His eyes were dark and unreadable, the eyes of a man who had spent his life evaluating whether people were telling him the truth. Then he nodded. When it came time to sign the contract, he didn't even negotiate the price. He paid in full, right there, a wire transfer that took less than an hour to clear. His finance guy quietly suggested they might want to compare a few other projects first. Leo waved him off. "I trust sales champion Josai," he said. "Every property I bought from her back in the day, which one didn't double in value? She has a gift. You don't argue with a gift." When the contract was signed, my commission came to $110,000. It hit my account while I was sitting at Fiona's dining table eating instant noodles, the cheap kind, the kind that came in a foam cup and cost 99 cents. My phone pinged with a bank alert. I tapped it open. Fiona leaned over and stared at my phone screen. She froze for 3 full seconds. Then she set down her chopsticks and let out a long, low whistle. "Mila Zhou, one deal, and you've made more than most people make in 2 years." I smiled and finished my noodle broth, tilting the cup to get the last drops. I opened the calculator on my phone. Cash on hand, plus this commission, plus savings I'd quietly tucked away before leaving the marriage. Money I'd saved from the household account. $20 here, $50 there, a secret fund built from years of skimming grocery money and birthday gifts. Around $900,000. I still held shares in Homeworld Realty, equity worth somewhere around $6.5 million. Combined, I had over $7 million in assets I could deploy. "Not enough?" I said quietly, looking out the window at Crestview Tower, its silhouette sharp against the evening sky. "Not enough." Fiona's voice jumped half an octave. "You have $7 million and it's not enough? What are you trying to buy? A small island? Do you want to start your own country?" "Not an island," I said, zooming in on a map of the Riverview district on my phone, my fingertip tracing the outline of a single block. "I'm buying the one thing Kyle Zhao wants more than anything else in the world." Over the next 3 months, my pipeline never stopped flowing. Old clients, hearing I was back in the game, started reaching out on their own, a quiet trickle at first, then a steady stream, then a flood. Word spread the way it always does in tight-knit industries. Mila Zhou is back. She's taking clients. She's as good as she ever was. At my peak, I was taking 8 clients a day to tour properties, crisscrossing the entire metro area from the industrial waterfront to the suburban office parks. When morning traffic locked up the highways, I used the gridlock time to do my makeup in the car, return messages, review client files. I got very good at applying eyeliner at stoplights. At night, when I got home, my legs were so stiff I'd have to sit on the little stool in Fiona's entryway for 10 minutes before I could stand up and take off my shoes. Fiona told me I was working too hard. Your annual dividends from Homeworld alone are 6 figures. Can't you slow down a little? Look at your heels. They're nothing but scars. She was right. The backs of my heels were a mess of old blisters and new calluses and the faint silvery lines of healed cracks. They looked like a roadmap of the past 3 months. I shook my head. It wasn't that I didn't want to rest. It was that I couldn't afford to. The money was enough to live on, but it wasn't enough to win. I wasn't after a comfortable life. I was after making Kyle Zhao vomit up every single thing he had swallowed. For that goal, 7 million wasn't enough. I needed more. I needed enough to buy a building out from under his feet. In those months, I saw the Riverview district at 4 in the morning, heading back to the office after client dinners to finish organizing contracts. The streets empty except for delivery trucks and the occasional homeless person pushing a shopping cart. I saw construction sites at noon, walking clients through unfinished concrete shells and high heels, my heels sinking into mud and sawdust, my voice echoing off bare walls. I saw the emergency room in the middle of the night, acute gastritis from chronic sleep deprivation and a diet that consisted mostly of protein bars and black coffee, dragged to the hospital by an irate Fiona who threatened to tie me to the bed if I didn't rest. Once, while I was still hooked up to the 4-drip, a client called. I used one hand to scroll through documents on my phone for 15 minutes, negotiating a counteroffer while the 4-line tugged at my wrist. When I finished, I looked up and realized the nurse had already come and swapped out the 4-bag. I hadn't even noticed. Fiona was so furious she nearly threw my phone out the hospital window. Are you actually sick in the head? Do you have a death wish? She slammed a thermal lunch container onto my bedside table. Drink the soup. My mom made it. She said if you don't eat properly, you're going to blow away in the next strong wind. If you lose any more weight, by the time you stand in front of Kyle Zhao, he's not even going to recognize you. I laughed and picked up the soup bowl. The 4-needle was still taped to the back of my hand, the clear tube snaking up to the bag hanging from the metal pole. I held the bowl with my other hand and didn't spill a drop. Don't worry, I said. When he's standing at his highest peak, I will be standing right in front of him, and I will make him see exactly what he threw away. Every single thing. 3 months later, it was September. The air had turned crisp, the leaves starting their slow transformation from green to gold. My cash on hand, combined with several more commissions, had grown to over $900,000. My Homeworld shares were valued at roughly $6.5 million. And there was one more piece, an old project I'd worked on with Vincent Wang years ago, a mixed-use development on the south side. A parcel of land in that development had been requisitioned for a public transit expansion, and the compensation had come through after years of bureaucratic delays. Under our original agreement, my share was substantial. Added together, I could mobilize close to $8 million. Just about enough. Fiona called me, speaking so fast her words were tripping over each other. Mila, listen, Crestview Tower. There's movement. The kind of movement we've been waiting for. The original owner of Crestview Tower was a Hong Kong businessman named Lawrence Chan. He'd started out in export trading in the 80s, shipping textiles and electronics out of Kowloon, and had been investing in U.S. real estate for years. Crestview Tower was his biggest project. Land acquired 3 years ago, construction started 2 years ago, completed just this past summer. But he was in a liquidity crunch. His Hong Kong operations had come under investigation by the Independent Commission Against Corruption, and he needed a massive infusion of cash to cover his liabilities and keep his other businesses afloat. He decided to offload Crestview Tower. Asking price, $18 million. About $2 million below market. And he required a full cash purchase, single lump sum, no installments. No financing contingencies. No grace periods. Cash, in full, within 30 days. $18 million. All cash. Fiona said. At this price, buying it is practically stealing it. The location, dead center of the Riverview District core, literally 0 distance from the light rail station. 3 adjacent buildings, all Class A office towers. Even if you did nothing with it, just collected rent, you'd recoup your entire investment within 5 years. The The problem is 18 million. How do we piece that together? Even with your 8 million, we're still 10 million short. I was in my office, looking out at the Riverview district. Crestview Tower stood directly across from me, its glass curtain wall blazing in the sunset, every window catching the orange light and throwing it back in a dazzling display. Kyle Zhao, sitting in his shabby old office across town, could definitely see this building from his window. He was probably staring at it every single day, thinking, when can I move in? When can I stand in that corner office and look down at the city I've conquered? I'll figure out the money, I said. I hung up and called Vincent Wong. The phone rang for so long I thought it was about to go to voicemail. 6 rings. 7. 8. Then he picked up, his voice rough, like he'd been sleeping. Vincent, I need to ask you for something. I want to buy a building. Crestview Tower. 18 million. My own funds, plus pledging my shares, can get me to 9 million. I'm 9 million short. I know it's a lot. I know it's insane. But I need you to trust me. Silence. A long, heavy silence that stretched out so long I pulled the phone away from my ear to check if the call had dropped. Then he said, which building? Crestview Tower. The new one. The one everyone's been fighting over. He went silent again. Then he suddenly laughed, a deep, rumbling sound like distant thunder rolling across the plains. Mila, Kyle Zhao has been running his mouth all over town about moving into Crestview Tower, and you're going to buy the entire building out from under him? You are absolutely merciless. Ruthless. I love it. He stopped laughing and his voice turned serious, the way it always did when business was about to happen. 9 million is not a small amount. But I believe in you. The way you sold that project for me back then, $22 million in 3 months, from a development everyone said was dead in the water, I'll never forget it. I've owed you that favor for 6 years. Time to repay it. I'll put up 9 million for a 40% stake. You handle the rest. Don't let me down. With Vincent's 9 million, all that remained was my own portion. I pledged my Homeworld shares to the bank and took out a loan for 9 million. The bank officer looked at me like I was crazy. A recently divorced woman with no current income except commissions, asking for a $9 million loan. But when she saw the Homeworld shares and the valuation report and my track record, her expression changed. Fiona helped me process the pledge paperwork, translating the bank's legalese into plain English and making sure there were no hidden traps. When I walked out of the bank after signing the final document, the autumn sun bright in my eyes, she tugged my sleeve. Mila, are you really sure about this? What if Kyle doesn't lease? You'll be stuck holding an $18 million building with a loan payment that could crush you. This is a massive risk. I stood on the steps outside the bank, the granite cool under my feet. A breeze was blowing in off the lake, carrying the smell of water and fallen leaves. He'll lease it, I said, because moving into Crestview Tower is the biggest dream of his entire 6 years. He's told everyone, his suppliers, his clients, his competitors, every person he's ever had a drink with. His vanity is far bigger than his judgment. He'd rather go into debt than not move in. He'd rather mortgage his soul than lose face. I know him, better than he knows himself. The day I signed the purchase contract was September 18th, exactly 3 months since my divorce. 3 months to the day since I'd walked out of that apartment with nothing but a suitcase and a plan. Lawrence Chan sent his authorized representative, a Hong Kong lawyer in his 50s, wearing a dark gray suit that probably cost more than my first car. He had silver-rimmed glasses and the careful, deliberate manner of someone who had spent his entire career making sure nothing was ever left to chance. He sat down across the conference table and pulled a thick stack of bilingual contracts out of his briefcase, each page printed in both English and Chinese. Our side included Homeworld's legal team, myself, and Vincent Wong's financial representative, a sharp-eyed woman in a navy blazer who never smiled. 12 people sat around the conference room, the air thick with the smell of coffee and the quiet tension of a high-stakes negotiation. The lawyer flipped through the contract page by page, using his index finger to point at each clause for my confirmation. Section 3.2, right of first refusal on adjacent parcels. Section 7.1, environmental indemnification. Section 12.4, force majeure provisions. The process took close to 2 hours without a single break. My coffee went cold. My back ached from sitting ramrod straight. But I read every line, every clause, every comma. I wasn't going to miss anything. Not this time. When I signed the final page and set down the pen, a heavy Mont Blanc that the lawyer had handed me with a slight bow. The lawyer rose to his feet, extended his hand, and offered a slight bow. Ms. Zhou, Crestview Tower now belongs to you. Congratulations. May it bring you great prosperity. $18 million. I had just bought Crestview Tower in the core of Lakewood's Riverview District. Total area, over 340,000 square feet. 22 floors of Class A office space. Direct light rail access. Sky garden on the roof. Top-tier amenities including a fitness center, a conference facility, and an underground parking garage with electric vehicle charging stations. From this moment forward, this building bore the name Zhou. Fiona was standing in the doorway, holding a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. She looked at me, and the corner of her mouth slowly stretched all the way to her ears. President Zhou, she said, from now on, should I call you boss? Or should I just start bowing? Get out, I said, laughing. The laugh felt strange in my throat, like a muscle I hadn't used in years. I packed the signed contract into my new briefcase, dark brown leather, a quiet statement, the first nice bag I'd bought for myself in 6 years. Before this, the bag I used was an old laptop bag Kyle had discarded, the zipper broken and held together with safety pins, the strap frayed, the leather peeling. I'd carried it for 3 years because I'd told myself I didn't need a new one. Because I'd told myself his needs came first. But that night, I received a message. Kyle had been at a bar with his cronies, bragging. Someone had filmed it on their phone and sent it to Fiona, who forwarded it to me with a string of laughing emojis. Crestview Tower was as good as his. The owner's my buddy, he'd said, leaning back in his chair with a whiskey in his hand. Once he moved in, he was going to throw a launch party on the top floor, champagne, catered hors d'oeuvres, a string quartet. His exact words, slurred slightly by the alcohol. Once I'm in Crestview, I'm going to make every person who ever looked down on me eat their words, especially Mila Zhou. She thinks she can live well after divorcing me? She'll be back on her knees begging soon enough. They always come crawling back. Fiona sent me the video. Kyle was holding a glass of whiskey, his face flushed red, his tie loosened, spit flying as he talked. The men around him were egging him on. Boss Zhao, you're unstoppable. Boss Zhao, you're going to be on top of the world. One of them clapped him on the back, so hard whiskey sloshed onto the table. I watched the video twice, then a third time. Then I turned off my phone and looked at myself in the mirror. The face that looked back was different from 6 months ago. Thinner, the jawline sharper, the cheekbones more pronounced. But the eyes were bright. That was the real difference. Back when I was a full-time housewife, I'd always felt like a lamp that had been dimmed. The light was still there, but it couldn't shine through the shade. Now someone had lifted the shade. Now the light was blazing. I told Fiona to leak a story. The new owner of Crestview Tower was a low-profile investor who preferred to remain anonymous. All leasing matters were being handled exclusively by Homeworld Realty. The terms were brutal. Rent was 20% higher than comparable Class A office space in the area, and they required 3 full years of rent paid upfront plus an additional 2-month security deposit. No negotiation of any kind. Take it or leave it. Fiona asked if those terms would scare everyone away. I said that was exactly the point. Scare away most of them, and keep the ones who were truly determined. The harder something is to get, the more people will fight for it. That was the first law I'd learned in 10 years of battling in the real estate industry. Scarcity creates desire. Exclusivity creates value. Make them want it so badly they can't think straight. 3 days after we put out the word, Kyle sent an intermediary to find Fiona, a man named Old Roger, who ran a decorating business and had done some work for Kyle's office. He called Fiona on a Tuesday afternoon. Fiona, you know Kyle Zhao, right? Kaixin Construction Supplies. He wants to lease space in Crestview. He's tried several channels and hit a wall. He heard you're the exclusive agent now. He's very motivated. Fiona had the phone pinned between her ear and shoulder, a pen in her hand, already writing down the details. Kyle Zhao? Yeah, I know him. Tell him to come to my office. We'll talk. Wednesday at 2. Kyle came to Homeworld Realty on a Friday afternoon. It was unseasonably hot, an Indian summer scorcher, the kind of day where the asphalt shimmered and the air conditioning struggled to keep up. I stayed in Fiona's office, watching through the one-way mirror sheet installed during the renovation. From her side, you could see straight into the reception room. But the people in the reception room saw only their own reflections. It had been installed for high-stakes negotiations, for reading body language without the subject knowing they were being watched. Today, it was my private theater. Kyle had on a custom-tailored dark gray suit, the fold marks still visible on the cuffs. Brand new. The best armor he could assemble. He must have bought it specifically for this meeting. His hair was slicked with so much product it looked wet, combed back in a style that was meant to look sophisticated but just looked desperate. Monica Lee was on his arm, wearing a pink Chanel suit, carrying an Hermes bag that probably cost $20,000. She kept touching the bag, repositioning it, making sure it was visible. Kyle entered the reception room, adjusted his tie, cleared his throat, and straightened his back. He swept his gaze around the room. The contemporary art on the walls, the exquisite tea set on the coffee table, the floor-to-ceiling windows with the city sprawling below, and his face took on an expression that said, "This place is acceptable. This is the level I deserve." Fiona sat on the reception room sofa in a black silk blouse, her expression strictly business. She didn't offer them tea. President Zhao, Crestview Towers rent is $12 per square foot per year. This price is non-negotiable. To lease, you'll need to prepay 3 full years of rent in a single lump sum, plus an additional 2-month security deposit. 3-year minimum lease term. Monica Lee's face changed instantly. The smug composure cracked, replaced by something sharp and ugly. This is outrageous. The office towers around here are barely $9. And 3 years rent up front? No one has terms that harsh. This is predatory. Fiona smiled, a cool, professional smile that didn't reach her eyes, and slid a comparison chart across the table. Ms. Lee, the $9 buildings are the old ones, built in the early 2000s, slow elevators, not enough parking, HVAC systems that break down every other week. Crestview Tower is brand new Class A, LEED Gold certified. Earthquake-resistant structure. If you want to compare it to those, I can't help you. She set down her coffee cup with a deliberate clink. Also, Whitfield Development had someone here just yesterday. Their marketing director came in person. Very eager. They want 5 floors for their West Coast headquarters. They offered a higher rate. But President Zhao was my client first. Out of respect for our existing relationship, I should give him the first opportunity. This offer expires at the end of the week. Kyle kicked Monica under the table. I saw her flinch, his face breaking into a wide, ingratiating smile. Fiona, hold off on Whitfield. We'll lease. Floors 12 through 14. 3 floors, straight on Lakeview. The best floors in the building. Hold them for me. He pulled a business card from his inside pocket and offered it with both hands, the gesture almost deferential. I'll have finance wire the deposit tomorrow. $25,000. That enough? I can send more if you need it. Monica opened her mouth, but Kyle silenced her with a look, a hard, warning look that said shut up or I'll make you regret it. She rolled her eyes and turned toward the window, her arms crossed tightly over her Chanel jacket. Fiona pulled out the letter of intent, flipped to the signature page, and slid it across the polished wood table. Sign here. Once the deposit clears, I'll hold those 3 floors for you for 3 months. Come in within that window to sign the formal lease and pay in full, and floors 12 through 14 are yours. If you miss the deadline, the deposit is non-refundable, and I release the floors to the next interested party. No exceptions. Kyle picked up the pen. He didn't even glance at the letterhead listing the landlord's information. He didn't flip to the first page. He didn't read a single word. Scratch, scratch, 2 strokes, and it was done. His signature, the same slightly smeared scrawl that had been on the loan agreement 6 years ago. He smiled. Fiona, you're a real professional. Once we've moved in, I'm taking you to dinner. Any restaurant in the city. You name it. As he walked out, his strides were huge, his back ramrod straight, his chest puffed out like a rooster. Monica clung to his arm, already complaining about the rent. Kyle, this is insane. You're going to bankrupt us. And Kyle's voice drifted back from the hallway. You don't get it. What kind of place is Crestview Tower? The moment we move in, every developer in this city will know we're the real deal. Later on, when I buy Crestview Tower outright, see who dares to look down on me then. I'll make Mila Jo come line up outside my office for a job interview. Let her see exactly what kind of life she can live without me. Let her beg. I leaned against the wall behind the one-way mirror and burst out laughing. The sound echoed in the small observation space, sharp and bright. Fiona walked in, holding the signed letter of intent, and waved it in front of my face like a winning lottery ticket. At the elevator just now, he told Monica that you must be having a miserable life after the divorce, probably washing dishes in some diner. Said he pictured you up to your elbows in greasy water, crying into the dish soap. I took the letter of intent and glanced at it. The landlord's name was printed as Lakewood Crestview Commercial Management, LLC, the corporate entity I had specifically registered for the purpose of buying this building. The sole shareholder was Mila Zhou. Kyle hadn't even looked. He'd been so blinded by his own ambition, so consumed by the image of himself in that corner office, that he'd signed without reading. I pulled out my phone and snapped a photo of his signature. "That's fine," I said. "Let him keep bragging. The bigger he talks, the louder the crash when he hits the ground. And he's going to hit it hard." 2 days later, Kyle's $25,000 deposit hit our account. He immediately started bragging to everyone in the industry that he and the owner of Crestview Tower were tight, that the best 3 floors had been saved for him personally. He told suppliers at trade shows. He told clients at dinners. He told competitors at networking events. "The owner's an old friend," he'd say, with a wink that suggested deep, unspoken connections. "We go way back. He saved the best floors for me personally. The view from my office is going to be spectacular. You can see the whole lake." People in the construction supply world fawned over him. "President Zhao, you're on your way to the top. President Zhao, you're going to be the king of this city." Someone even passed the gossip along to me, asking if I wanted to expose him right then at the next industry mixer. I shook my head. Not yet. I wanted the biggest possible audience when his world collapsed. The investment forum, with every real estate and construction heavyweight in the room, would be perfect. It was the annual event of the season. Everyone who mattered would be there. And I would be the one holding the microphone. Kyle's situation was already deteriorating, though he didn't know I knew. He had landed several large supply contracts with major developers, Whitfield, Meridian, Coastal, but to boost his margins, he'd secretly swapped in substandard materials. Cheaper steel, lower grade insulation, counterfeit fireproofing that wouldn't pass a basic inspection. The developers' quality inspections caught it. They withheld over $300,000 in final payments and threatened to sue for breach of contract if he didn't fix the problems immediately. Kyle was scrambling, pulling every string he could find, calling in every favor. He thought that if he could just move into Crestview Tower, the prestige alone would solve all his problems. Developers would trust him again, banks would extend him more credit, and everything would turn around like magic. So even though his cash flow was stretched to the breaking point, he was desperately trying to scrape together the 3 years upfront rent, which came to nearly $400,000. I heard he was mortgaging his condo. The condo he'd claimed was his premarital property, the condo he'd thrown me out of. I heard he was considering high-interest bridge loans from lenders who charged 20% and broke your legs if you missed a payment. Fiona asked if we should strike now. We could just reject his lease application. Kill the deal. Watch him squirm. I shook my head. Let him climb higher. The fall hurts more when you're standing at the top. I want him to feel like he's already won before I pull the rug out. The investment forum was scheduled for December 18th, exactly 6 months since my divorce. 6 months to the day. The symmetry was too perfect to be accidental. I arranged for my introduction to come first on the program, with the MC announcing me as the owner of Crestview Tower. The day before the forum, I got a fresh haircut, a sharp, chin-length bob that made me look like a different person, bought a new navy power suit with subtle silver pinstripes, and put on a pair of classic red-soled heels that cost more than my entire wardrobe for my marriage. Fiona looked me up and down, walking a slow circle around me, and whistled. Now that's the Mila Zhou who used to own this city's real estate scene. That's the woman I remember. I adjusted my collar in the mirror, studying my reflection. The Mila Zhou who had given up her career for love. She had died 6 months ago, on a rainy June evening, on a divorce agreement she signed without trembling. The woman standing here now, in the mirror, was someone else entirely. She was here to take back everything she had lost, and then some. The forum was held in Crestview Tower's grand lobby, which had been transformed into an elegant event space. The marble floors had been polished to a mirror shine. Crystal chandeliers had been hung from the soaring ceiling. White floral arrangements the size of small trees stood in every corner. A string quartet played softly in the background. Over 200 guests arrived, developers, investors, suppliers, the full roster of the city's real estate elite. I was backstage when I heard Kyle's voice drifting through the curtains. He had gotten a fresh haircut, shorter on the sides, the way he always wore it when he wanted to impress, and was wearing the custom suit I'd bought him 2 years ago, the one that had cost over $3,000. I recognized the subtle pattern of the fabric, the particular cut of the lapels. Monica was draped on his arm in a $15,000 haute couture gown, a diamond ring flashing on her finger. New, probably, or at least new to her. Kyle was working the room, pressing his freshly printed business cards into every hand he could reach. The cards bore his name, Kyle Zhao, CEO, Kaishin Construction Supplies, and the address line read, Floors 12 to 14, Crestview Tower, Riverview District. He'd already had them printed. He was that confident. President Zhao, you're incredible. How did you manage to get space in Crestview? Yeah, the owner is so secretive. You must have serious connections. Who is it? Give us a hint. Kyle basked in the adulation, his smile stretching from ear to ear, his chest puffed out so far I thought his buttons might pop. The owner and I go way back, he said, loud enough for half the room to hear. We're like brothers. Known each other for years. He saved the best 3 floors specifically for me. The view from my corner office is going to be spectacular. You can see the whole lake, the mountains, everything. Backstage, I had to cover my mouth to keep from laughing out loud. Fiona handed me a glass of water, her eyes sparkling with barely contained glee. The bigger the boast, the harder the fall, she whispered. I can't wait to see his face. At 9:30, the forum officially began. The MC bounded onto the stage, a professional event host with a gleaming smile and a wireless microphone. Welcome, everyone, to the Crestview Tower Investment Forum. I know what you're all dying to know. Who is the mysterious owner of this magnificent building? The person behind the most talked-about commercial property in the city. The crowd murmured in anticipation. Kyle, seated in the front row, he'd positioned himself front and center, of course, leaned back with a smug smile, probably expecting the MC to call his name, or at least the name of his supposed best friend. The MC paused dramatically, letting the suspense build, then extended a hand toward backstage. Please join me in giving the warmest welcome to the sole owner of Crestview Tower, Ms. Mila Zhou. The applause was thunderous. I stood, smoothed my blazer, and walked onto the stage with calm, measured steps. The spotlight hit my face, warm and bright. The room went dead silent, the kind of silence that falls when 200 people all stop breathing at the same time. Every single pair of eyes locked onto me. Kyle's smile froze on his face, stuck there like a mask that had been glued on. His champagne glass tilted in his hand, golden liquid spilling over his fingers and onto his trousers. He didn't even notice. Monica's eyes went as wide as dinner plates, her mouth hanging open, a smear of coral lipstick visible on her front tooth. Someone in the back row dropped a wine glass. The shatter was the only sound in the room. I stood at the podium, looking out over the sea of stunned faces, and picked up the microphone. Good morning, everyone. I'm Mila Zhou, the owner of Crestview Tower. Thank you for coming today. I'm honored to welcome you to my building. The room erupted. The silence shattered into 100 different conversations, all happening at once. Mila Zhou, Kyle Zhao's ex-wife. She owns Crestview. But Kyle's been telling everyone the owner is his best friend. They go way back, he said. Didn't he say she was washing dishes somewhere? She looks like she just stepped off a private jet. This is incredible. This is the best thing I've ever seen at an industry event. The murmurs surged like a tide, waves of shock and disbelief and barely suppressed laughter. Kyle's face cycled through white, red, and an ugly shade of purple that looked almost painful. He shoved his chair back, the legs scraped against the marble floor with a horrible screech, ignored the hands trying to restrain him, and stormed onto the stage. He planted himself in front of me, his finger jabbing toward my nose, his spit flying. Mila Zhou, who the hell do you think you're fooling? You've been gone from me for 6 months. How much money could you possibly have made? How could you be the owner of this building? What kind of sugar daddy did you latch onto? Did you find some rich old man to bankroll your little revenge fantasy? That was the moment. The opening scene. I looked at Kyle's face, twisted with arrogance and contempt, and I reached into my bag. My fingers closed around the property deed, the one from the Lakewood County Recorder's office, with its dark green cover and its bright red notary stamp. I pulled it out and slapped it onto the podium in front of him. The sound echoed through the silent ballroom like a gunshot. The cover fell open. The ownership line read, in clear, unambiguous print, mellow. Tenancy, sole and separate property. Property address, Crestview Tower, Riverview District. Total area, 344,000 square feet. Registration date, 3 days prior. Kyle's eyes bulged. His chin, which had been jutting out so arrogantly just seconds before, froze in place. The champagne glass finally slipped from his fingers and hit the carpet with a muffled thud, golden liquid splashing across his trouser cuffs and Monica's designer heels. She jumped back with a little shriek, but he didn't even notice. Dead silence. Kyle stared at the deed for a full 10 seconds. His mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping on a dock. Then his voice came out in a strangled, high-pitched shriek. Fake. That deed is fake. You had someone forge it. You're a liar. Fiona walked up from the side of the stage, holding her phone. Her heels clicked against the marble with the calm, measured rhythm of someone who had all the time in the world. On the screen was the county recorder's official online database, the property details for Crestview Tower displayed in crisp digital text, matching my deed exactly. The website URL was clearly visible. The official county seal was in the corner. President Zhao, she said, her voice cool and carrying. Would you like me to call the police and have them verify the deed's authenticity right now? I'm sure they'd be very interested in your accusations of forgery. Also, that letter of intent you signed last week. The landlord listed on the first page is Mila Zhou. Did you not bother to read it before signing? You really should read things before you sign them, President Zhao. Kyle went rigid. He fumbled in his jacket pocket, his hands shaking so badly he could barely grip the paper, and yanked out the letter of intent. He flipped to the first page, and when his eyes landed on the landlord information, Mila Zhou in black and white, right there, impossible to miss. All the color drained from his face, leaving it the shade of drywall compound. The paper trembled in his hands. Monica grabbed his sleeve, her voice high and panicked. Kyle, what the hell is going on? What is she talking about? Kyle shook her off so violently she stumbled backward, her heels skidding on the marble. His finger jabbed toward me, trembling violently, the nail bitten down to the quick. You set me up. You planned this from the beginning. You bought Crestview Tower just to humiliate me. I looked at him. This sputtering, desperate, pathetic man, his face purple, his tie askew, his carefully constructed image crumbling in front of 200 of the most important people in his industry, and I smiled. It was a calm smile, a genuine smile, the smile of a woman who had waited 6 months for this exact moment. Kyle, you can't just go around saying whatever pops into your head. I bought Crestview Tower because it was a good investment. The cap rate is excellent, the location is prime, and the appreciation potential is outstanding. You came to me begging to lease space. I never forced you. I never called you. You approached my agent. You signed the letter of intent. You bragged to everyone in this room about your connections. That was all you. I paused, letting the silence stretch, watching the sweat roll down his temple. But there's one thing you should know. Crestview Tower's leasing standards explicitly exclude companies whose principals have documented records of moral turpitude, infidelity, concealment of marital assets, coercing a spouse into signing away her rights under false pretenses. Do those count as moral turpitude? I believe they do. I believe any reasonable person would agree. I paused again, letting the words sink in. The room was so quiet I could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Your lease application, I said slowly, clearly, each word a nail in his coffin, is denied. Your $25,000 deposit will be returned to you via wire transfer. Please don't come to Crestview Tower again. I find your presence distasteful, and I don't want you in my building. The room exploded with laughter. It wasn't polite, restrained laughter. It was the kind of laughter that comes from watching someone fall face first into a wedding cake. So that's how Kyle Zhao knows the owner, someone shouted from the back. He's been bragging about his best friend. Turns out it's his ex-wife, and she won't even rent to him. This is the best thing I've ever seen at a business forum. I'm putting this in my speech at the next chamber dinner. He had business cards printed. He had the address on his business cards. Kyle stood on the stage, his face cycling through colors like a malfunctioning traffic light, rooted to the spot. Finally, his assistant scrambled up, a young guy in an ill-fitting suit who looked like he wanted to be anywhere else in the world, grabbed his arm, and physically dragged him off the stage. As he stumbled away, nearly tripping over Monica's gown, Kyle shot me a glare of pure venom, a look that promised retribution, revenge, destruction. I ignored him. I had seen more intimidating glares from clients who'd had too much coffee. I lifted the microphone to continue my presentation, my voice calm and steady. The applause that followed was louder than before, and the looks people gave me had shifted: respect, admiration, and more than a little wariness. By the end of the forum, I had signed over 20 letters of intent. Crestview Tower hit 60% occupancy on its first day. As the crowd dispersed, Vincent Wong walked over, his broad face creased with a grin, and clapped me on the shoulder. "Mila, that was a masterclass. I've seen a lot of business moves in my life, but that was art. After today, there isn't a single person in this city's real estate industry who won't know your name. And there isn't a single person who will ever do business with Kyle Zhao again." Kyle slunk back to his office, not Crestview Tower, but his old, dingy office in a building with slow elevators and not enough parking. But before he could even sit down, his assistant came running in, white-faced and shaking. "President Zhao, we've got a problem. A huge problem. Whitfield, Meridian, Coastal, and Riverside. They've all sent termination notices. All of them, within the last hour. They're canceling all their supply contracts, citing substandard materials, and they're demanding penalty payments. The total is over $300,000. Kyle went numb. He grabbed the documents and flipped through them, his hands shaking so badly the pages rattled. Every page bore an official company seal. Every page cited the same clause in their contracts about material quality standards. He grabbed his phone and dialed the procurement director at Whitfield Development. It took 5 tries to get through. Each time, it rang and then went to voicemail. "Dan, what's going on? We've had a great partnership. Why the sudden cancellation? This has to be a misunderstanding." Dan's voice was ice cold, the voice of a man who had already made up his mind and was just going through the motions of informing you. "President Zhao, there's no misunderstanding. Our company's strategic partner, Mila Zhou, informed us that your company has been substituting inferior materials and that you personally have serious integrity issues. Our legal team has reviewed the evidence. Our corporate office has issued a directive. Whitfield will no longer do business with Kaishin Construction Supplies, period. Effective immediately. We'll be pursuing full penalty payments as outlined in our contract." Kyle stood there, phone in hand, utterly paralyzed. Those contracts had accounted for 80% of his company's revenue. 80%. Now they were all gone. And on top of that, he owed over $300,000 in penalties. Just then, his finance manager burst in, not even knocking. "President Zhao, the bank rejected our loan application, said our company's credit rating has been flagged for review, and our suppliers are calling in their outstanding invoices. They want the $340,000 we owe them by the end of the month, or they're taking us to court for breach of contract. I've got 3 voicemails from collections agencies already." Kyle collapsed into his office chair, the cheap fake leather creaking under his weight, his back soaked with sweat. He had mortgaged his condo and his car to scrape together the Crestview Tower deposit and had borrowed $80,000 from a loan shark, a man named Dimitri who operated out of a check-cashing store on the south side and had a reputation for breaking kneecaps with a tire iron. Kyle had been convinced that once he moved into Crestview, he'd sign a few big contracts and everything would stabilize. Now the contracts were gone, the loan was rejected, and his cash flow had simply stopped. The money had evaporated. There was nothing left. He called every good buddy he'd ever done favors for, asking for loans. He called the men who'd been at the bar with him, the ones who'd clapped him on the back and called him unstoppable. Either they didn't answer, or they hung up the moment they heard his voice. One of them, a supplier he'd known for 10 years, actually said, "Kyle, you've made an enemy of Mila Zhou. Nobody in this city's real estate scene is going to touch you. If I lend you money, I'm crossing her. And I can't afford to cross her. She owns Crestview Tower. She's connected to Vincent Wong. She's untouchable. You're on your own." He called everyone. His contact list, which had seemed so full of friends and allies just a week ago, was now a list of people who wouldn't take his calls. He didn't raise a single cent. Desperate, he remembered the condo he had mortgaged to the loan shark. Maybe he could take out a second mortgage from another lender. He drove to a hard money lender on the edge of town, a place that advertised "no credit check" in neon letters in the window. But the loan officer ran his information and shook her head. "Mr. Zhao, your property has been frozen by court order. A Ms. Mila Zhou has filed a lawsuit against you, claiming you've defaulted on a debt of $320,000. She's obtained a prejudgment attachment. Your condo, your car, and all your company accounts have been frozen. There's nothing I can do for you." Kyle stood in the lender's lobby, a dingy room with fluorescent lights and plastic chairs, the world spinning around him. He pulled out his phone with shaking hands and found the court summons, along with the attached loan agreement, the one from 6 years ago, when Mila had given him $180,000 to start his business. He'd signed something without reading it. On a busy morning when he was running late for a meeting, he'd assumed it was just a formality, just something to make her feel secure. It was a promissory note. The principal, the interest rate, the term, all laid out in black and white, with his signature at the bottom. There was no way to wriggle out of it. The interest had been compounding for 6 years. He finally understood. Mila had planned this from the moment she signed the divorce papers 6 months ago. She hadn't signed away everything because she was stupid, or weak, or broken. She had signed because she didn't need his scraps. She was after everything. She had been playing a long game, and he had been playing checkers. The day of the hearing, I sat in the plaintiff's seat, wearing a simple but elegant black dress. Kyle sat across the aisle at the defendant's table, unshaven, red-eyed, a hollow shell of the swaggering man who had thrown divorce papers at me 6 months earlier. He'd lost weight. His suit hung off his shoulders. His lawyer, a public defender, because he couldn't afford private counsel anymore, reviewed the evidence and told him flatly, this case was unwinnable. The promissory note was valid. The interest rate was legal. The term was clear. The best option was to settle and hope for mercy. The judge asked if we were willing to mediate. I nodded. Kyle, after a long pause and a desperate look at his lawyer, nodded too. In the mediation room, a small, windowless space with a plastic-top table and 2 chairs, Kyle looked at me with bloodshot eyes. Mila, you planned this from the start, didn't you? You signed the divorce settlement knowing you'd use this loan agreement to destroy me. You never loved me. I met his gaze without flinching. I gave you $180,000 because I wanted you to build us a home. I loved you enough to give you everything I had. You destroyed that home. You destroyed it with your own choices. So I'm taking back every cent. With interest. I didn't force you into anything. You chose to cheat. You chose to throw me out with nothing. You chose to sign that agreement 6 years ago without reading it. These are your choices, Kyle. Not mine. Every single one was yours. He slammed his hand on the table, the sound sharp and loud in the small room. We were married. Can't you show me any mercy? We had 6 years together. Mercy. I stood and picked up my bag. When you made me sign away everything and walk out with nothing but a suitcase, where was your mercy? When you stood in my kitchen on our anniversary and told me I hadn't earned a dime, where was your mercy? You'll pay what you owe. The court will decide the terms. If you don't pay, I'll pursue enforcement. And by the way, I've compiled all the evidence of your tax evasion, the unreported income, the offshore accounts, the shell companies. If you force me to, I'll forward it to the IRS. Every last page. I walked out of the courthouse into brilliant sunshine. The sky was a perfect, cloudless blue. Fiona was waiting by the curb in her Mercedes, and she handed me a hot latte. Oat milk, no sugar, exactly the way I liked it. How'd it go? Do I need to bail you out of anything? I took a sip, perfectly sweet. Smooth. He won't get away with a single cent of what he owes me. The judge looked at the promissory note and practically rolled her eyes at his defense. Just as I got into the car, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. It was a screenshot of a plane ticket, one way to Barcelona, departing the next morning, and a short message. Mila, thanks for showing me who Kyle really is. I should have seen it sooner. I've taken $300,000 from the company account. Consider it compensation for wasted youth. I'm not going down with his sinking ship. The evidence of his tax evasion is already on its way to the IRS. You're welcome. Monica. I stared at the message and burst out laughing. The universe was delivering Kyle's karma on a silver platter, with a side of poetic justice. What was that old saying? Lose the wife, lose the mistress, lose the army. Kyle had lost all three. Kyle found out about Monica's departure the next day. He came home to an empty apartment. Her belongings gone, the closet stripped bare, nothing left but empty hangers and the faint lingering scent of her perfume. On the kitchen counter, next to a cold cup of coffee, was a note. At the bottom, she'd added, "Clean up your own mess. Don't drag me into it. And by the way, I never loved you. I loved your money. Now you don't have any." Kyle, reading those words, coughed up blood, actual blood, bright red droplets on the white kitchen counter, and collapsed. A neighbor heard the thud and called an ambulance. He spent 3 days in the hospital, hooked up to monitors, staring at the ceiling. The day after he was discharged, still wearing his hospital bracelet, the IRS agents arrived at his door. 2 of them, in dark suits, with badges and a warrant. Monica had sent them a comprehensive package, years of bank records, doctored tax returns, evidence of systematic fraud. His tax evasion totaled over $400,000. With penalties and interest, he owed nearly $700,000. If he couldn't pay, it wasn't just bankruptcy. He was facing criminal charges, tax fraud, potential prison time. Kyle had run out of options. His assets were frozen, his accounts seized, his clients gone, his suppliers and employees suing him. The loan shark's enforcers were camped outside his building, 2 large men in leather jackets who sat in a black SUV and watched his door. Every friend he'd ever had was suddenly screening his calls. His phone, which used to buzz constantly with messages and invitations and business opportunities, was silent. He came to Crestview Tower on a drizzly evening, waiting outside the lobby. I worked late and didn't come down until after 9. The security guard had called up to warn me. There was a man outside. He looked homeless. Should they call the police? I told them to let him wait. The moment I stepped through the revolving doors, I saw him, huddled on the steps in a ratty down jacket that was patched with duct tape, his hair plastered to his forehead by the rain, stubble covering his jaw, a hole in the toe of his sneaker where his sock poked through. He looked like a homeless man. He looked like someone you'd cross the street to avoid. The moment he saw me, he dropped to his knees in a puddle of rainwater. The water soaked through his pants instantly. "Mila, I was wrong. I was so wrong. Please, let me go. I'll do anything. I'll cook for you. I'll clean for you. I'll be your servant for the rest of my life. Just don't let them send me to prison. I'm begging you." He was sobbing, tears and rain mingling on his face, his forehead hitting the wet concrete with a dull thud. "Let's get remarried. I swear I'll treat you right. I'll never cheat again. I'll be the husband you deserved. Please, please." I heard the word remarried, and I couldn't help but laugh. The sound echoed in the empty plaza, sharp and clear. I crouched down to his level, my voice quiet and even. "Kyle, do you still not understand what happened here? When you threw me out with nothing, did you think about this day? Did you imagine yourself on your knees in the rain? You told me I couldn't survive without you. You forgot that before I was your wife, I was the top closer in the country, 3 years in a row. I made my first million on my own, with my own hands. I can make the second and the third just as easily. You're not a tragedy in my life. You're a pothole I drove over. A bump in the road." I straightened up, smoothed the front of my coat. The rain had started up again, a light mist that beaded on the wool. "Remarriage is out of the question. I find you repulsive. The thought of touching you makes my skin crawl. As for the money, you'll find a way to pay it, or you'll go to prison. Those are your options. Either way, it's exactly what you deserve." I turned and walked to my car without looking back. My driver, I had a driver now, opened the door for me. As we pulled away, I glanced in the side mirror. Kyle was still on his knees on the wet pavement, his face buried in his hands, his shoulders shaking with sobs. The rain was coming down harder now, plastering his hair to his skull, soaking through his jacket. He looked small and broken and utterly defeated. I felt nothing. No pity. No satisfaction. Just a vast, clean emptiness where the pain used to be. Every path is chosen by the one who walks it. He chose his. He could walk it on his knees. 6 months later, Crestview Tower hit 95% occupancy, the hottest office building in the Riverview district. The waiting list was 3 pages long. I dedicated an entire floor, the 8th floor, with the best natural light, to a women's entrepreneurship incubator. Rent-free workspace for women who had been trapped in domesticity the way I had been, trying to rebuild their careers after years of being told they weren't good enough. weren't smart enough, couldn't make it on their own. Over 20 projects had launched: floral design studios, graphic design firms, social media consultancies, a catering company, a sustainable fashion brand. Each one thriving. They all called me Mila, or sometimes just boss. And they told me that without this space, they'd still be at home, invisible, circling their husbands and children like moons around a planet that didn't know they existed. One of them, a woman named Sarah who had left an abusive marriage with 2 kids and no savings, told me she'd hung a picture of me in her office for inspiration. I told her to hang a mirror instead. I ran into Kyle occasionally. He was delivering food now, riding an electric bike through the city streets in all weather, sun and rain, in the biting Pacific Northwest winter. His bike had a cracked seat and a basket zip-tied to the handlebars. He had aged a decade in a year. His hair had gone gray at the temples, and deep lines had etched themselves around his mouth. One time, a delivery order came to my office. Someone had ordered Thai food for a late-night working session, and when the door opened, it was him. He was wearing a stained orange jacket with the delivery company's logo, and he was holding a paper bag of pad Thai. He saw me, and his face flushed crimson, the color rising from his neck to his hairline. He thrust the bag of takeout toward me, head down, and practically sprinted back to the elevator. He didn't say a word. The elevator doors closed, and he was gone. Fiona told me he was struggling. Wife gone, mistress gone, house gone, business gone, buried in debt he'd never be able to repay, pedaling 12 hours a day just to stay ahead of the interest on his loans. The IRS had seized everything he had left. The loan shark had taken his car. He was living in a rented room above a laundromat. I said, "Oh," and changed the subject. What did any of that have to do with me? His story was no longer part of mine. December 18th, the 1-year anniversary of my divorce, and the 1-year anniversary of Crestview Tower's grand opening. I threw a party in the Sky Garden on the top floor, inviting every business owner in the building. The Sky Garden was strung with fairy lights, and heaters blazed against the winter chill. The view of the city was spectacular, a carpet of lights stretching out to the lake and beyond. Fiona handed me a glass of champagne, grinning. "A year ago, you were walking out of that apartment with nothing. Now the entire city knows your name. Forbes wants to do a profile on you. You're the most powerful woman in Lakewood real estate." Who could have predicted this? I clinked my glass against hers. When I got married, I thought love was everything. I thought being a wife was the most important thing I could be. Now I know, the most reliable things in a woman's life are her own abilities and the balance in her bank account. Love is nice. Independence is better. Someone called up from the floor below. It was time to cut the cake. I drained my champagne and turned to go. Fiona called after me. "Mila, now that you're so successful, have you thought about finding a new boyfriend? I know some very eligible men. Very rich. Very handsome." I glanced back over my shoulder and waved a hand. Why would I need a boyfriend? Making money is way more satisfying than managing a man, and it never leaves its socks on the floor. I had a career now. I had friends. I had more money than I could spend in a lifetime. I bought what I wanted, traveled where I pleased, answered to no one. No more standing over a stove waiting for a man who wouldn't come home. No more shrinking myself to fit someone else's ego. No more apologizing for being too ambitious, too driven, too successful. This life, this big, bright, unapologetic life, was absolutely intoxicating. The cake was wheeled out, 3 tiers, with Mila Jo, "The future is yours" written in gold script. I picked up the knife and cut the first slice. The crowd cheered. Kyle Zhao had believed I couldn't survive without him. He forgot that before I was his wife, I was a national sales champion. I made my first $180,000 on my own. I could make the 2nd, and the 3rd, and the 8th, and the 10th. Leaving him didn't destroy me. It freed me. I wasn't just surviving. I was thriving, at a level so far above him that even standing on his tiptoes, he couldn't touch the soles of my shoes. He was a pothole. I was a skyscraper. My future was just getting started. As for the trash I'd left behind, it wasn't even worth a backward glance. I had buildings to buy, businesses to build, and a life to live. And I was going to live it on my own terms, every single day, without apology.